But basically, let's get into this question. Tell me about yourself. It's the most general question they could possibly ask. And you could talk about literally anything. You could talk about your political opinions. You could talk about your food dislikes. You could talk about your vital statistics. You could talk about your ambitions. You could talk about your opinions when it comes to comic books. Technically, any of those would be answers to this question, but that's obviously not what they're looking for, okay? So to understand what the interviewer is looking for, we need to go back to the context in which they're asking it, okay? You're here for a job interview. Their situation is that they are probably talking to several candidates, okay? They probably just haven't brought you in for an interview. They probably brought other people too. So they're trying to decide which of these people they should choose, okay? So if you're given a question that's totally open-ended, probably the thing to do would be to speak to the things that you would expect them to be looking for and wanting to hear with regard to this job. So what are they looking for? Well, let's talk about recruiters. Hiring managers are different, okay? Hopefully everybody knows the difference between a recruiter and a hiring manager. The recruiter is the person who works in the HR department. The hiring manager is the boss. So if you're being hired to rebuild engines, the hiring manager is the manager, the person who supervises the people who rebuild engines. So they're probably a glorified mechanic, right? If you are you're applying for a job as an accountant and you're talking to the hiring manager, that means you're probably talking to a senior accountant, because if you get hired, you'll end up working for them. They'll be your boss. That's usually how it works. Okay, so that's the difference between these two people, the recruiter and the hiring manager. Okay, so because they're two different roles with entirely different backgrounds, they're looking for different things. Now, if you were talking to a hiring manager, someone who rebuilds engines and is an expert at rebuilding engines, and they're wanting to hire you to rebuild engines, it might make sense to talk about how you can rebuild engines, right? And all the details of it and the specifics and what models you've worked on and how long you've been doing it, and maybe your opinions about how it should be done or what tools you use. If you're speaking to a hiring manager, they would understand that stuff. The problem is, if you're talking to a recruiter, someone who works in the HR department who doesn't understand anything about engines, right? And you talk all about the tools you use to degrease an engine or rebore an engine or, upgrade an engine or, whatever, they won't have any clue what you're talking about. They won't know if that's good or bad. All they know is that you're not really telling them something that they recognize as good. Okay? So it depends on the context to know how to answer this question. Now, if you don't know who you're talking to, you're just talking to a person, you have no idea who they are, they haven't really explained who they are, what they do, what their interest is. The most default basic answer to this question is to go down the requirements that were in the job description. So if they said they were looking for someone who has this certificate of educational qualification, and they were looking for someone who has these skills, and they were looking for someone who has 5 years experience doing this type of work, well, it would be probably a good thing to talk about how you have all those, right? So go down the list of requirements and you can answer that. An alternative, this is one that I recommend actually, is you go down your resume, because your resume pretty much is the same thing. It's what you have. And you used your resume already to apply for the job, and they read your resume, and based on the strength of your resume and accompanying application, they invited you down for an interview. So that means that nothing on your resume disqualified you. It obviously was stuff that makes you look like you are a contender for this, right? So it's that kind of thing that we want to say, right? Things that make you look good. One caveat is that if you're going down your resume, okay, so you'd start off by saying, well, as you can see from my resume, and then you launch into a very quick summary of your resume. Maybe you start with your education, and then you go down your experience from the oldest to the newest. Now, if you don't have any career experience, like experience on the job, say you're coming out of school or something like that, Okay. You have a lot of experience, even though you don't know it. Okay. How can I put this? What do people do in their jobs? When you hire someone, what are they expected to do? Well, they're expected to follow instructions. They're expected to show up on time. They're expected to have a good work ethic. If you assign them a task that has a certain deadline, you're expecting them to be able to respect deadlines and have the work ethic to do work on time. You're expected to act professionally. You're expected to know what's appropriate conduct for a workplace and what's inappropriate conduct for a workplace, right? If you hire an employee and you work in an office type setting and they come to work and they get to work and they stretch and then they take off their pants and then they lounge around in their underwear, obviously that's going to be a problem, right? If you have to explain to this person that that's not appropriate conduct for the workplace, that's a real red flag, right? Because if they don't understand that, they probably don't understand a lot of other things that you would expect them to understand, right? Now, if you've just come out of school, okay, let's say you've come out of college or university or trade school or whatever you've been, you know all that stuff and you have all those things. You're able to complete work by the deadline. You understand professional conduct. You've obviously shown up on time. You have the discipline to study for exams and other evaluations and pass those evaluations. You can work in groups. You understand how to work in a group. You can get work done by deadlines. I don't know if I already said that, but there's like a whole list of skills that you have that you've demonstrated. Okay. So don't feel too inferior or anything if you just have you've come out of school and you say, I don't have any experience. Well, you have experience. You have experience with projects and things you've done within your education that demonstrate all of those traits, all of those abilities, right? It's not that you're saying that, you have them. It's that you've demonstrated you have them because you've obtained the qualification, right? So if you don't have work experience, go into those and say, I completed this project. It was a group project. I helped to coordinate that project and coordinate the work, not simply in dividing up the work and sort of ensuring that, we're all on the same page, but also checking up and doing course corrections if, there was any developments, and then ensuring that everybody's work came together, it all fit together, we submitted it on time, and we got a really high grade. Stories like that, things like this, that demonstrates your ability to be a good employee because that's what you're going to be doing on the job. You like how I switch between these two cameras? It gives you a really good view of my hair, which is fantastic, by the way, today. Oh, yeah. Hello to Fatima Zara, if I'm saying that right. I'm sure I'm not, but I make the attempt anyway. Thank you for being here. Welcome. Yeah, so if you don't have work experience, you can do that, okay? So you'll have stuff to talk to. Now, when you start to think about it, you actually have a hell of a lot of things you can say, okay? And what you're going to be doing by these is you're going to be demonstrating that you have the various requirements to do the job, okay? So this is a good starting point. If they ask you this question at the beginning of the interview, it's a great starting point. They can go outward from here, right? They can ask you about any of the things you've mentioned, like tell me about your education, tell me about this work experience you mentioned, tell me about more about that project, in what capacity did you work, that kind of thing, right? Never say anything negative. Never say I don't know, or I was not good at this, or, I tried to do this, but it didn't work out. Because even though those things might be true, what you've got to understand is that you're making a first impression. Okay, this is very important. This is a huge part of the context. So you go to a job interview and you're talking to someone that you don't know, and they don't know you. Now, if the first thing that came out of that person's mouth was a rude comment, what would you think about them? A lot of people would sort of form their opinion that oh, this is a rude person. I don't like them, right? You see how, they're making a first impression on you, right? They could be a wonderful person. Maybe they're just having a bad day, or maybe that came out wrong, and maybe they don't realize it came out wrong. Maybe they were trying to make a joke and it fell flat or something. But you see how the first impression thing works. That's what you're doing to them. So if the first thing that comes out of your mouth is when they say, so, have a seat, tell me about yourself. And you say, oh, gee, I don't know. I'm kind of a boring person, really. I've never had a job before, and, I don't know what to do, right? You're making a first impression on them. They might think, okay, this person doesn't sound like they're qualified, doesn't sound like they're very confident, doesn't sound like they're the model employee. And I'm not super optimistic about how this exchange is going to go. Right? That's the first impression. So never say anything bad about yourself. Don't put yourself down. Okay? Don't get me wrong. It's great to be humble in life. Okay? But you're in a sales pitch. Okay? You're doing a sales pitch. That's really what this situation is, a job interview. Imagine if somebody knocked on the door of your house or your apartment or whatever, your home, and they were selling, I don't know, Girl Scout cookies. And, you say like, yes, can I help you? Or, whatever your greeting is. And then they say, hi, I got these cookies and I don't know, they're okay, I guess. I don't know. You're probably not interested, sorry to bother you. Are you probably going to buy the cookies? Probably not, right? But if they say, hey, it's good to meet you. How you doing? I'm selling Girl Scout cookies. These are actually really good. Would you like to buy some? Maybe the chances of you buying them go up. And when I say stuff like this, I get people coming back with, well, I still wouldn't want to buy the cookie. Yeah, true. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at somebody who canvasses their whole neighborhood and they use the first approach where they're just like, oh, the cookies are great. And you look at how many sales they make, and then you look at the next person who did the second approach, the cheery, optimistic approach, confident, they tend to sell much more. Okay? There are all kinds of variations between people, but the odds are that you will do a lot better. Okay, so that's really what's going on in a job interview. You're making a first impression. This is usually the icebreaker question. And they can ask it in many different ways. They may not say, tell me about yourself. They might say, walk me through your resume. Or that, even after you've met them, you might have shaken their hand or you bumped their elbow or whatever you do a chest bump. However, whatever your standard greeting is in a professional situation. I've always said, it could be cultural. After you do that, they might say, please introduce yourself. Well, you've already introduced yourself. You already said, hello, this is my name. And, you shake hands. So it kind of feels weird to get that question again. It's another version of tell me about yourself. It's the icebreaker question. And no matter how they phrase that first question, which is the icebreaker, which is some form of tell me about yourself, you always give the same answer because it's the same question, right? So once again, my recommendation, if you're flying blind, you don't know who you're talking to, or you're talking to a recruiter, this is your first interview for this job. Sometimes jobs have multiple rounds of interview, but if, sometimes they only have one. But if this is your first one, the default way to answer would be to say, they say, tell me about yourself. And you say, well, as you can see from my resume, and then you go down your resume. I would say about 45 seconds to 60 seconds maximum to do this whole thing, because you don't want to be talking about this for 10 minutes. You go down your resume, you start with your education. I have this qualification. I've been working for the last 2 years in this place. This was my role. I've done this kind of work. And then and after that, I worked here. Oldest experience to newest experience. And then the way you end, a great way to end this is to say, and that's what brings me here today and why I'm excited to learn more about this opportunity. Okay, that's what I'd recommend the answer to be. Now, the reason you end like that is because, think about it. When you go to a job interview, you're not there to talk about something that you did 5 years ago in some other job, all the details of it, none of which apply to this job. It was a different thing, right? Working for somebody else. Obviously, you're going to be saying your qualifications and stuff, but getting into the nitty-gritty details of what you did for someone else, it's a waste of time. If you only have, say, 5 minutes of talk time during a job interview to say what you want, you don't want to waste that time on talking about what you did at some other job that has nothing to do with this job. Instead, you want to talk about how you're qualified to do this job, how you've got everything they're looking for, and how you can bring all of this to help them, what you can do for them. That's what you want to do. So the idea is that this question is an icebreaker, which means it gets the conversation started, but you don't take up too much time with this question. You don't spend 15 minutes of it. For example, you're here for the accounting job. Well, I see on your resume that you worked at SeaWorld for 5 years. What was that like? What's going on there? What did you do? Next thing you know, 15 minutes later, you've spent all this time talking about SeaWorld, and that's half your interview over for the accounting job, right? Stuff like that does happen. Mickey9 says, more examples of how they ask this question. Ask this question in different ways. They have all kinds of stupid canned answers for this. You know what? I am going to do you one better, Mickey9. I'm just going to pull up Google and I'm going to show you. Okay, so here you go. You don't have to take this from me. I mentioned 4 examples earlier, but let's see. Where do they answer it? Like, walk me through your resume is the obvious one. Here, I'm just going to do a search. Tell me something about yourself that's not on your resume. Okay, here's a good one. Let me talk about this for a second. If they say, tell me about something that's not on your resume, let me address this, okay? Now, for those of you that have done job interviews before, tell me if this has happened to you before, okay? You go down to a job interview. You would naturally be expecting them to know who you are, and before the interview starts, you would expect the person who invited you down to the interview to know what's on your resume, at least the basics, right? Because after all, they saw your resume, you sent it into them, and then they called you back, or they responded to you and said, come down for an interview. So the assumption is that when you get down there, they would know who you are, and they would know, at least have an idea of what's on your resume. But you find that that's not actually the case. You get there and they don't seem to know anything about you. They know that they called you back, but they don't remember you at all. They don't remember any of your anything that was on your application or anything that was on your resume. You're a total stranger to them. You're starting from scratch. Tell me if that's happened to you. That is extremely common. Okay? You go down to the interview, and what's happening behind the scenes is that they have interviewed several people maybe in a row that day, or they've had several things in a row, and they have had basically no preparation time before your interview. So they haven't had a chance to refresh themselves by reading or glancing at your resume or your application or any of their notes on who you were and why they called you back. Okay? That's pretty common. Obviously, that doesn't happen all the time, but I'd say 80 to 90% of the time, that probably happens. I know a lot of people have reported that back to me, and I have my own memories from years ago, from decades ago, of that happening to me. So you get down there, they don't know anything about you, and you almost feel insulted. You're like, well, if you don't know anything about me, I mean, why did you call me back? Like, it feels a little insulting. You don't even know who I am, or the first thing. But then they say, tell me something about yourself not on your resume. Now, there are more sophisticated ways to answer this question, but if they use this question first, it's another form of just tell me about yourself. And you can use the standard answer for it, where you summarize your resume in 45 to 60 seconds, and you just give them an overview of your resume, right? even though they said, tell me about something about yourself that's not on your resume, you answer with what was on your resume. And quite frankly, they can't tell the difference. They don't know. It's not like they have your resume memorized. So that would be an acceptable answer. Now, if you want to go above and beyond, what your resume doesn't have on it, by the way, is, well, for most people, is your ambition or the type of work you would like to do, right? That's usually not a section on your resume. It can be, and some people put all kinds of stuff on there and they can put that. But for the vast majority of people, they're not going to have that on there. So if they want to know something about you that's not on your resume, it's not this big reveal of your deepest, darkest secrets. Just say what type of work you enjoy doing. That's not on your resume. And obviously, if you're trying to get this job, what you say as the work you're trying to do is very, very similar to the job that you're here interviewing for, right? So that gives you some bonus points. Okay, but look, returning to this other form of tell me about yourself. Okay, like even this article has, like you see here, this is how to answer tell me about yourself, and other examples include tell me something about yourself that's not on your resume. So a lot of times it sounds like a different question, but it's actually not. In the context of the interview, you give the same answer. How would you describe yourself? Yeah, there isn't anything. I'm disappointed in Google. We maybe use Chat GPT for this. But okay, other forms of tell me about yourself would be, please introduce yourself, walk me through your resume, tell me a bit about yourself, what brings you here, can you describe your past history? Any of those questions, they're all essentially the same question as tell me about yourself. It's a very general question where you have to do some kind of introduction and give an overview of who you are, right? They could say, what makes you tick? I don't think that's very common to say it in that form, but that would be another form of it, right? So you're going to encounter this, and recruiters love to feel superior by coming up with yet new ways of asking the same old stuff, right? They think they're so original in doing this. There are a few really, really capable, smart recruiters out there, but there's a hell of a lot of mediocre ones too. So, and I can say this, I used to teach recruiters in university. So, this is my honest opinion. It's also, in some circles, a recruiter is also an entry-level job. So it's not like you're dealing with the world's rocket scientists. It's not brain rocketry, put it that way. I've heard some people recommend that, when they say, tell me about yourself, you start by thanking them and all this kind of stuff. Nothing wrong with that, but usually what you do is when you walk into the room or when you first encounter the person, like as part of your greetings, you say, hello, it's good to meet you. My name is this. So in my case, I would say I'm Bill Todd. It's good to meet you. And then they would introduce themselves. And then the next thing out of your mouth would be, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to, discussing this job and seeing where it goes. It's really interesting stuff. Something like that. That's kind of part of just, doing a greeting and following protocol, right? Unfortunately, that in lower circles, that stuff is usually not done. People are not very sophisticated, not as much as they should be. That's one thing that, this sounds bad to say, but that's one thing that separates upper level people from lower level people, is this knowledge of protocol and manners, having really good manners. What you want to do, ideally, especially in a situation like this, is you want the other person to feel good about you. You don't want them to think like, oh, I don't like this person before the interview even starts, right? That's probably not a good thing. So one way to make sure that doesn't happen is, you're very cheery, very warm, you're very polite. You say, hello, it's great to meet you. Thank you for inviting me down here today. I'm really interested in this job, and I think you guys, from what I've seen, are doing a fantastic job. I'm interested to see how this goes. something like that. And you have a bit of a smile and you're happy. And most people, unless they're like a real miserable piece of work, they'll probably respond to that in kind and say, oh, well, thank you very much. We're happy to have you. And, I'm also interested in seeing how this interview goes. Something like that, right? So that's part of the greeting. I wouldn't say like you answer this question by thanking them. So that's part of the greeting. But potato, if you haven't done it so far, it's not a bad idea to start the interview with it by thanking them for the opportunity. Okay. Even if you don't feel like it, even if you don't feel like saying it, it's the polite thing to do. Things will go better for you if you do that stuff.